They were called the last outlaws of the frontier. To bankers and railroads, they were a plague. To the poor, they were folk heroes. And to the lawmen who hunted them, they were ghosts riding the wind. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid didn't just rob banks and trains. They robbed the American imagination and left behind a story of friendship, betrayal, and blood that refuses to die. Not killed in a shootout on Main Street, not hanged by a judge's order, but vanishing into the shadows of South America, where rumor insists they rode forever. Who were they? How did a ranch hand and a sharpshooter become the most feared duo of the Wild West? And how did their story end in a blaze of bullets, or in mystery that lingers even today? Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Outlaws of the Wild West, where legends live forever. Each week, we bring you the untold stories of America's most notorious outlaws. Don't miss the ride. Now, let's turn back to the dusty roads of 1866, where a boy named Robert Leroy Parker took his first steps toward becoming the outlaw the world would know as Butch Cassidy. Robert Leroy Parker was born on the 13th of April, 1866, in Beaver, Utah Territory. His parents were poor Mormon immigrants from England, struggling to scrape a living from the rocky soil. The Parker family had 13 children, mouths to feed, backs bent under the Sunday. Robert, known as Bob to his family, was the oldest son. From a young age, he shouldered responsibility, plowing fields, herding livestock, repairing fences. Life was simple but hard. There was no gold, no silver, no future beyond sweat and survival. But Bob was restless. He wasn't content to be a farmer chained to dirt and drought. He had a quick wit, a charming grin, and eyes that searched the horizon for something bigger. As a teenager, Bob left home to work as a ranch hand. He moved from place to place, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, wherever there was work with cattle or horses. It was in these wide-open ranges that he met a man who would change his life. Mike Cassidy, a small-time cattle rustler. Mike was smooth, daring, and reckless. He stole cattle, sold horses, lived by his own rules. Bob admired him. The young ranch hand began to follow Mike on jobs, small thefts, dodging sheriffs, laughing in the face of risk. From Mike, Bob learned not only how to steal, but how to charm. Mike never killed unless cornered. He joked with victims, sometimes even signed receipts after a robbery. To him, crime was a game, not a bloodbath. Bob Parker adopted this style, and more than that, he took Mike's last name. Soon, he wasn't Robert Parker anymore. He was Cassidy. Later, when he led his own gang, he would become Butch Cassidy, the most famous outlaw of the American West. But in the beginning, it was poverty and restlessness that drove him. Not evil, not bloodlust, just a boy who wanted more than a life of dust and plows. And yet, the choice of friends, the taste of easy money, and the thrill of freedom would push Robert Parker into a path from which there was no return. Butch Cassidy's first serious brush with the law came in 1889. He had been drifting between ranches, working with cattle, gambling, and always looking for opportunity. That year, in Telluride, Colorado, Cassidy and a few companions made their move. They planned to rob the San Miguel Valley Bank. Cassidy had studied the routines, watched the streets, and calculated the risks. On June 24th, they struck. The gang burst into the bank, revolvers gleaming, voices sharp and commanding. Inside, panic erupted. Clerks froze, customers screamed. Cassidy, calm as ever, grinned as he ordered the tellers to fill their sacks with cash. Unlike other outlaws, he didn't curse or shout. He almost seemed polite. But make no mistake, this was no game. When the sacks were full, he tipped his hat, and the gang bolted out into the Sunday. They rode hard into the mountains, dust clouds rising behind them. Posses were sent, but the gang vanished into the canyons. By the time the law regrouped, Butch Cassidy was gone, richer, bolder, and now infamous. The Telluride robbery became a legend. Newspapers declared Cassidy one of the most daring bandits in the West. For Cassidy himself, the robbery was more than money. It was proof. He could outwit banks, outmaneuver sheriffs, and live by his own code. From that day, Butch Cassidy's path was set. He was no longer a ranch hand searching for work. He was an outlaw. And with each success, his legend grew. Butch gathered more men, forming what would become the Wild Bunch, one of the most notorious gangs in history. With names like LZ Lay, Kid Curry, and later, the deadly sharpshooter Harry Longabaugh, the man who would be known as the Sundance Kid, this gang would terrorize banks and trains from Wyoming to New Mexico. The Wild Bunch didn't just steal. They outsmarted. They rotated hideouts, left decoys, and split profits fairly. Their network stretched across states, with ranchers and sympathizers, giving them shelter. The law was furious. Pinkerton detectives were hired. Bounties grew. And yet, Cassidy always stayed one step ahead. It was during these years that Cassidy built his reputation as a gentleman bandit. He cracked jokes with hostages, refused to kill unnecessarily, and sometimes even left receipts as if mocking the banks. But behind the charm was calculation. Every job was planned with precision, every escape rehearsed. The frontier had seen bandits before, but the combination of Cassidy's brains and his gang's boldness was something new. They weren't just thieves, they were legends in the making. And then came the man who would make that legend eternal. Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid. By the late 1890 seconds, Butch Cassidy had built something more than a gang. He had created a legend, the Wild Bunch, the boldest band of outlaws the frontier had ever seen. The newspapers couldn't get enough of them. With every daring robbery, the myth grew. They weren't petty thieves hiding in shadows. They were riding under the open sky, robbing trains and banks in broad daylight, as if daring the world to stop them. One of their most famous hits came in June 1899. The Union Pacific Overland Flyer, a train hauling mail and cash, thundered across Wyoming. As night fell, the engineer spotted lanterns waving frantically near Wilcox. Thinking it was an emergency, he slowed the train. That was when the Wild Bunch struck. Masked riders emerged from the darkness, revolvers raised. They forced the train to a stop, uncoupled the cars, and made their way to the express car. The safe inside was massive, locked tight, guarded like a fortress. But the Wild Bunch had dynamite. The blast shattered the still night. Flames lit the canyon as the express car door blew apart. The guards scrambled, smoke and dust choking them. When the air cleared, the Wild Bunch was already hauling out sacks of cash, bonds, and gold. Reports say the take was between $30,000 and $50,000, a fortune in its day. The robbery sent shockwaves across the nation. The Union Pacific Railroad was furious, the Pinkerton Detective Agency enraged. Newspapers declared it one of the boldest crimes in American history, and at the center of it all was Butch Cassidy, grinning in the shadows, leaving behind no bodies, just chaos and embarrassment for the richest company in the land. But that was only the beginning. In July 1900, they struck again. The First National Bank of Winnemucca, Nevada. It was high noon when the Wild Bunch stormed through the doors. Customers dove for cover as Butch and Sundance demanded cash. The clerks, trembling, filled the bags. And once again, Cassidy showed his style: no unnecessary violence, no killings, just speed, precision, and audacity. They escaped into the desert, horses pounding against the sand. By the time posses organized, the gang had vanished into the canyons. Each job added to their legend. The Wild Bunch became heroes to some, villains to others, but always larger than life. The Pinkertons called them a cancer. Detectives swore to destroy them. Posters plastered towns. Wanted, dead, or alive. Rewards rose higher and higher. Yet the more the law hunted them, the more the Wild Bunch seemed untouchable. They rotated hideouts from Robber's Roost in Utah to Hole in the Wall in Wyoming. Rugged places where posses dared not follow. These hideouts became fortresses, stocked with supplies, guarded by loyal friends. It was at Hole in the Wall that Cassidy and Sundance cemented their bond. Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, was a sharpshooter, quick on the draw, deadly with a rifle. Where Cassidy was charming and calculating, Sundance was quiet, dangerous, and fast. Together they balanced each other: brains and bullets, charm and steel. Their partnership was legendary. And with every robbery, the myth of the duo grew stronger. But legends come at a price. With each daring job, the law tightened the noose. The Pinkertons weren't just chasing shadows anymore. They were following tracks, interviewing witnesses, tracing stolen money. Step by step, the net closed in. And though Cassidy laughed at danger, he knew the truth. No outlaw rides free forever. The Wilcox robbery was more than just a heist. It was a spectacle that rippled across America. The newspapers called it the crime of the century. Editors printed lurid headlines. Train dynamited. Outlaws mock the law. Ordinary people, huddled around saloons and train depots, whispered about the Wild Bunch with awe. Some admired their daring, others feared them. But all agreed. No one had ever humiliated the mighty Union Pacific like this. For days, the wreckage lay scattered across the Wyoming plains. Broken timbers, blackened metal, and torn mailbags littered the track. Detectives scoured the site, lifting footprints, measuring horse tracks, collecting scraps of dynamite fuse. The Pinkertons swore vengeance. Butch Cassidy read the papers with a grin. He knew every word only fueled their myth. And the Wild Bunch was more than two men. Among them rode Kid Curry, the most feared gunman of the plains, quick to anger, quicker to kill. Some claimed he left a trail of corpses wherever he went, balancing Cassidy's no unnecessary bloodshed with ruthless violence. Then there was Elsie Lay, loyal and steady, who many said was Cassidy's closest friend. Others like Ben Kilpatrick and Harvey Kid Curry Logan rounded out the ranks, each one a character in a saga that seemed larger than life. Together, they made the Wild Bunch a force unlike any other. Where one man might falter, the others picked up the slack. Where one outlaw could be tracked, 10 could scatter across the desert, splitting pauses until exhaustion broke them. And their hideouts were legends in themselves. Hole in the Wall, Wyoming, a fortress of red rock, hidden passes, and sheer cliffs. Only those who knew the winding trails could find their way in. It was said the Wild Bunch could vanish there with stolen cash, and no sheriff in the West would dare pursue them. The public became divided. To ranchers and small folk, Butch Cassidy was a kind of Robin Hood, a man who robbed the rich companies that bled them dry. To railroad barons and bankers, he was a plague, a symbol that the West was still wild and uncontrollable. The Pinkertons printed their wanted posters with fresh ink, raising rewards higher and higher. Cassidy's grin, Sundance's stern eyes, Kid Curry's scowl plastered across every post office, every saloon wall, every sheriff's desk. But the higher the bounty, the bigger the legend grew. And the more the law hunted them, the more people whispered that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were untouchable. For now, by 1901, the Wild Bunch was no longer just a story whispered in saloons. They had become the most hunted men in America. Rewards for Cassidy, Sundance, and their riders soared higher than ever before. Posters nailed to every telegraph pole shouted, "Wanted dead or alive." Railroad companies pooled money, hiring Pinkerton detectives and private posses, determined to bring the gang down. No longer were they the carefree legends who robbed trains with laughter and bravado. Now, every knock on a cabin door might be the law. Every meal shared with a rancher might end with betrayal. They rode with shadows clinging to their backs. The Pinkertons were relentless. Ledgers of stolen banknotes were tracked, serial numbers recorded, rumors traced across states. Farmers claimed to have seen masked men crossing their fields at night. A blacksmith in Wyoming swore he had shod Sundance's horse. In Montana, a bartender described a tall man who bought whiskey with crisp bills that smelled of dynamite smoke. Step by step, the detectives built a map of the Wild Bunch's movements. Inside the gang, tensions began to show. Kid Curry, violent and unpredictable, grew restless. To him, robbery without bloodshed was weakness. He taunted Cassidy's preference for charm over bullets. Others, like Elsie Lay, wanted out, tired of the endless chases and nights in the saddle. For all their camaraderie, the Wild Bunch was a family bound not by love, but by necessity. And necessity was beginning to fray. Still, Cassidy clung to his vision of a gentleman outlaw. He dreamed of retiring, of buying a ranch, of living peacefully under the wide skies. Sometimes he even joked about striking a deal with the government of pardon in exchange for exile. But each new robbery made peace harder to reach. Each headline nailed their names deeper into history. In 1900, after the Winnemucca bank job, Pinkerton reports claimed they had narrowed Cassidy's hideout to a network of ranches in Utah. Posses rode out under the blazing sun, combing valleys, searching canyons. But Cassidy had friends in every town, sympathizers who fed him, hid him, misled the law. Every time the noose seemed to tighten, he slipped away with a grin. But even legends cannot outrun time forever. The pressure was building, and somewhere in the shadows, cracks began to split the Wild Bunch apart. The pressure came to a head after another spectacular heist in 1901, the Great Northern Train robbery near Wagner, Montana. Once again, the Wild Bunch used dynamite, blasting the express car into twisted metal. Flames lit the prairie night as they hauled away nearly $65,000 in cash. It was their richest score yet, but also their most dangerous. The robbery left the railroads humiliated and furious. This time, the Pinkertons moved with surgical precision. Reports of every stolen bill were circulated nationwide. Telegraph lines crackled with alerts. Trains were searched, towns locked down, travelers questioned. Cassidy and his riders had always lived fast, but now every door closed quicker. Every trail seemed marked. Inside the gang, arguments turned to shouting. Kid Curry wanted to keep fighting, to kill their pursuers before they killed him. Cassidy argued for retreat, for finding a way out. Some men sided with Curry, tired of running, eager for blood. Others followed Cassidy, believing his charm could still find them safe harbor. The Wild Bunch was splitting into factions. Loyalty stretched thin. The pressure grew unbearable. One by one, members drifted away. Some were captured, some killed, others vanished into obscurity. The Wild Bunch, once a roaring storm, was becoming scattered raindrops in the desert wind. Cassidy and Sundance clung to each other through it all. Together, they still dreamed of escape, of slipping beyond the reach of the American law. Whispers began to circle. South America. A new frontier where the law was thin, the land rich, and outlaws might carve out new lives. But the Pinkertons weren't done. They chased Cassidy's trail from Wyoming to Colorado, from New Mexico to Texas. Every time a rancher swore he'd seen two strangers riding fine horses. Every time a saloon girl whispered about a polite man with gray eyes and a foreign accent, the detectives were there. One step behind. The Wild Bunch could still vanish, but their time was running out. The great game of outlaw and lawman had reached its climax. Cassidy knew it. Sundance felt it. And together they faced a choice. Fight to the last bullet on American soil, or ride into exile and gamble on freedom far from home. The legend of the Wild Bunch was entering its final act, and the cracks that had splintered the gang were pushing Cassidy and Sundance toward the most fateful decision of their lives. By 1901, the American frontier had grown too small for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The Wild Bunch was finished, the law was closing in, and every saloon whispered of their capture. To Cassidy, exile wasn't just an option, it was survival. So he and Sundance set their sights south. Along with Sundance's partner, the mysterious Etta Place, they sailed for Argentina. The journey itself was bold. Boarding a ship under false names, mingling with businessmen and families, the two outlaws disguised as respectable gentlemen. For weeks, the Atlantic stretched around them, and with every mile, they shed the weight of wanted posters. Argentina was everything they dreamed. Wide open spaces, rich soil, and ranches as vast as small kingdoms. Cassidy bought land in Patagonia under the name James Ryan, building a ranch of cattle and horses. Neighbors remembered him as polite, hardworking, even generous. He paid his bills, tipped well, and charmed everyone he met. For a time, it seemed the outlaw had become a rancher. But legends cannot live quietly for long. By 1905, the Pinkertons had caught wind of their escape. Reports trickled in. Two Americans, wealthy and mysterious, living like princes in Patagonia. Suspicion spread. Soon, Argentine authorities began watching closely. Cassidy and Sundance felt the walls closing in, so they wrote again. In 1905, a payroll shipment was robbed near Rio Gallegos. Witnesses claimed two Americans carried out the heist. Days later, Cassidy and Sundance returned to their ranch, pockets full of cash. The polite ranchers had vanished, the outlaws were back. From Argentina, they drifted into Chile, then Bolivia. Each new country promised safety. Each new robbery funded another escape. But every move left behind whispers, and every whisper drew the law closer. By 1908, they were in Bolivia, working small jobs, robbing payrolls, living as fugitives once more. Their faces had aged, their eyes weary, but their legend burned as fiercely as ever. And fate was waiting in the mining town of San Vicente, Bolivia. November 1908. A dusty mining town, little more than a cluster of adobe huts under the shadow of the Andes. It was here that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid faced their final reckoning. The story goes that the pair robbed a payroll mule train near the town of Tupiza. They fled with sacks of silver, but the alarm spread fast. Soldiers and local police gave chase, driving them into San Vicente. By nightfall, the two Americans had rented a small hut on the edge of town, trying to disappear into the shadows. But the net had closed. At midnight, gunfire erupted. Witnesses later recalled the rattle of Mausers echoing through the canyon. Soldiers surrounded the hut, bullets smashing through adobe walls. Inside, Cassidy and Sundance returned fire, their revolvers flashing in the dark. Hours passed, the air thick with smoke and fear. Then came silence. The Bolivians claimed they found two bodies at dawn. One was shot through the head, the other through the chest. Some said Sundance was dying, and Cassidy ended his life with a final bullet before turning the gun on himself. Others swore the soldiers killed them both in the firefight. Either way, the two outlaws who had defied the American West for over a decade were gone. Or were they? Rumors spread like wildfire. Some miners whispered that the bodies didn't match the descriptions on the wanted posters. In Argentina, ranchers insisted Cassidy had returned years later, gray-haired but grinning. Families in Wyoming swore old men had confessed on their deathbeds. I rode with Cassidy. He made it out alive. Historians still argue. Some point to Bolivian records, others to DNA tests on graves in San Vicente. None have ever been conclusive, and so the legend endures. Did Butch Cassidy die in Bolivia, or slip away once more into the great wide world? For Sundance, too, myths abound. Some claim he returned quietly to the United States. Others that he wandered South America for years, and at a place, the mysterious woman who rode beside them, she vanished entirely, her fate as shadowy as the men she loved. What is certain is this. By 1908, the age of outlaws was ending. The West was fenced, the railroads ruled, and the law stretched farther than ever before. But Cassidy and Sundance lived on, not in flesh, but in story. Their charm, their daring, their refusal to bend to the law turned them into folk heroes. Songs were sung, dime novels printed, movies filmed. Even today, their names draw nods of recognition. Legends are not measured by years, but by memory. And as long as the frontier is remembered, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid will never truly die. So ends the tale of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, two men who refused to bow to the world that tried to tame them. They were not saints, nor were they simple killers. They were something larger. Men who lived in defiance of rules, carving their names into the stone of legend with gunpowder, laughter, and blood. Their story is not just about robberies or escapes. It's about the myth of the frontier itself, a place where charm and violence danced side by side, where loyalty could be bought or betrayed, and where freedom always came with a price. Did Cassidy and Sundance die in a hail of bullets in Bolivia? Or did they ride once more into the sunset, grinning at the law that never quite caught them? Perhaps we will never know. But maybe that is what makes their legend endure, not certainty, but mystery. If you've stayed with us until the end, thank you for riding through history with us. Don't forget to subscribe to Outlaws of the Wild West, where every week we bring you the raw, untold stories of America's most infamous legends. Share this video. Drop a comment about whether you believe Cassidy and Sundance survived, and join our growing community of listeners who know, in the Wild West, legends never die. Until next time, ride safe, and remember, history is never just in the past. It lives on in the stories we tell.